This week sees the publication of A Life in Movies, an autobiography by the film director Michael Powell. The films Powell made with his partner, Emeric Pressburger, such as The Life and Death of Colonel Blimp, Black Narcissus and The Red Shoes, are unique in British cinema, and almost every young British director now claims them as inspiration. Powell's work, always imaginative, often surreal, bizarre and fantastic, challenges the usual ideas of what British cinema might be. His story traces a very un-English obsession with film.
All my life I've loved running water. One of my passions is to follow a river downstream until it reaches the sea. Today that sea lies before me in plain view, and it's time to start the story of my life. To remount it to its source before I swim out, leaving behind the land I love so much into the grey, limitless ocean. Yet, although I love grass and trees and woods and forests with the passionate love of an Englishman for his island, I shall not be afraid to swim out over those awesome depths. I've seen men and women far better and cleverer than I, crippled by illness, killed by chance. I've been allowed to reach the summit at which I aimed, in a profession that never existed until we invented it.
The film on Michael Powell was one of the most remarkable South Bank shows we made. He was the supreme filmmaker. Some people think still the greatest film director that we've had in this country. He worked with Pressburger for 18 years. They worked on the scripts together. They had the same idea about the scripts. And Powell directed, Pressburger produced, but they were like that. I think he was in his own English way, and I use English in a sort of way that can almost not be used now, stiff upper lip. Looks a bit blimpish, in fact. His famous film was Colonel Blimp. He did a film about the red shoes, about these shoes who killed the dancer in the end. They were so demanding, these magic shoes, that she had to dance until she died. And he said, and I think he meant it, that he was just proving that art was worth dying for, and he believed that.
This is me with my pony, Fubsy. I was a dreamy boy, given to long reveries, during which I saw and heard nothing. My temple was the public library. My first thing was always to check down the Jules Verne's. They were all full of illustrations, and this is when it dawned on me for the first time that I had an eye. In January 1921, I saw a copy of a new magazine called The Picture Goer. I opened it and started to read. Somehow, the journalist had managed to convey the camaraderie of a film unit, the complete absence of any class distinction. And the aim was art, to go out into the real world and turn it into a fantasy world where anything could happen. This was for me. From now on, I knew that I was born to be a film director.
As a young stills photographer, Michael Powell found work on the set of a Rex Ingram film being made in the south of France. He took full advantage of the many opportunities working in a studio presented to him.
I was in the art department, the camera department, everywhere. But my favorite was the cutting room. People more and more are looking at the old films to see what they missed. What they missed was romance, mime, passion. This is an original Bell & Howell camera used on Rex Ingram's production of The Garden of Allah. My mentor in slapstick was Jimmy Gleason. He was great, and he taught me a lot, particularly about timing. I used to watch him on the set. I was shooting stills. I'd see him marking his script, and he'd be writing 1, 2, 3, do. D-O, do. So I said, Mr. Gleason, he said, yes, Sonny? I said, you just marked your script 1, 2, 3, do. What does it mean? He looked at me. He said, Sonny, that wasn't 1, 2, 3, do. It was 1, 2, 3, do. Look, I'll show you. I'm the plumber, see? I come to fix the bathtub. I put down the old bag of tools on the table, and I hear a splash. Could it be a splash? I turn. I see the girl in the bath. 1, 2, 3. The man! Hello? When I arrived in London in 1928, it was like a foreign city to me. The only shoes I had were sandals. The only name I knew was Alfred Hitchcock.
He worked on a script with Hitchcock and started directing short films. He became known to the acclaimed director Alexander Korda at Denham Studios, and through him, Powell would meet his artistic partner, Emeric Pressburger.
It was here in the old house. We had the story conference about a film called Spy in Black. Alex Korda was a genius at story conferences. He knew what he wanted, he knew how to get it, and he knew how to make the other fellow think he had thought of it. The producer was there, the English writer was there, and there was a rather smaller, anonymous character there. Alex lit a Corona and said, now, Emeric Pressburger has a few things to say about the script. Emeric, perhaps you will let us hear what you think about the script. Emeric felt in his pocket, and he produced his version of the script. This is it. It was a nice little rolled-up piece of paper, and he unrolled it, and he read the first scene, and I was spellbound. I just listened while he went on reading and unfolding it, and unfolding it, and unfolding it. He'd stood the story on its head. He'd turned a man into a woman into a man. He'd altered the suspense. He'd rewritten the end. I looked at the producer, he was purple in the face. I looked at the writer, he was prepared to faint. And I was just rejoicing that I was going to work with somebody like this, and that I wasn't going to let him get away in a hurry either.
In 1942, they formed their own production company, The Archers, and from then on, they shared a unique screen credit, written, produced, and directed by Michael Powell and Emeric Pressburger.
What Powell brought that maybe other British filmmakers didn't have was that he wasn't embarrassed or ashamed by cinema. It's quite close to the approach of the French New Wave. You know, people who grew up with cinema as their dominant influence, as opposed to the slightly earlier generation of filmmakers who grew up with literature and the theatre as the important things. They always had a sort of cultural cringe, a feeling that they were slightly inferior to, a Terence Rattigan drama.
During the Second World War, Michael Powell stayed in England to make films to help with the war effort. These included what many consider his best film, The Life and Death of Colonel Blimp. But the portrayal of its central character upset Winston Churchill.
You're an extremely impudent young officer. But let me tell you that in 40 years' time, you'll be an old gentleman, too. And if your belly keeps pace with your head, you'll have a bigger one than any of us.
Maybe I shall in 40 years, but I doubt it. And I doubt if I'll have time to grow a moustache like yours, sir. But in 1983, at least I shall be able to say that 40 years ago, I was a fellow of enterprise.
Whatever the film makes of the spirit of the young soldier of today, the fact remains that it focuses attention on an imaginary type of army officer which has become an object of ridicule to the general public.
Pray propose to me the measures necessary to stop this foolish production before it gets any further.
What was your reaction to what Churchill called this foolish production, his attempt to stop it?
We didn't bear any malice to Churchill. We knew he was mainly responsible for us all being reserved to make films during the war. At least he knew films were a real weapon.
So you're going to go make the film anyway. Did you feel sympathetic to Blimp as a character?
Oh, yes, I identify completely with him. Lots of things are exactly like me.
Such as?
Couldn't be more English. I was sentimental and loved women and dogs. I'd always felt enormously sympathetic with that kind of man. And, you know, honorable, puzzled, innocent, and doing a great deal of harm with his puzzlement and his ignorance and his innocence. And I see myself very much like that.
Do you also see him as a romantic figure?
I don't think that I've ever felt romantic. I've always felt like the same small boy who fell in love with soldiers and had a pony when he was 8 or 9. Very innocent, really. By 1945, the war was nearly over, and Technicolor was with us again. Jack Beddington, who headed the films division of the MFI, sent for us and said, "You chaps are very ingenious. You think of your own stories, you write your own scripts. In fact, your films are more like sermons than anything else." I said, "Thanks very much." He said, "No, look, surely Emeric can think of a way to make a film to show the Americans and the English that they love each other."
I'm signing off now, June. Goodbye. Goodbye, June.
Hello, G for George. Hello, G. George. Hello, G. George. Hello.
So long, Bob. I'll see you in a minute. You know what we wear by now, a prop or wings.
When you see Peter, would you give him a message for me? Avec plaisir. Just say, what ho? Bon.
When he's starved for Technicolor up there. What a night for love.
So when Marius Goring in the film comes out in the rhododendrons and says, "One is starved for Technicolor up there," everybody roars their head off. And it works. And after that, I knew I could do almost anything. I knew there was no realism in films, only surrealism. With A Matter of Life and Death, we had returned to the big show, the kind of film for which the movies were invented. I dreamt of challenging Hollywood with vast epics. Instead, I found myself in the Himalayas, making a film about nuns. It was Black Narcissus, and our mountains were painted on glass. Usually the thing was in those days, you sent a unit out on location. They came back or they didn't come back. Usually they brought quite a lot of stuff. It never worked really well. We decided to do the whole thing in the studio. And that's the way we managed to maintain color control to the very end. Sometimes in a film, its theme or its color are more important than the plot. We dress the nuns in white or off-white, quite intentionally to bring down the key of the color. People say that Black Narcissus is a very erotic film. I don't know. Maybe it is. All I do know is that it's full of wonderful performances and passion just below the surface. But finally, at the end of the film, erupts.
You say that because you love her!
I don't love anyone!
When I made Black Narcissus in 1946, I was already groping my way towards a new kind of film, what I called a composed film, a combination of music, action, dialogue, but the music being the master. There was one sequence in particular where Kathleen Byron stalks Deborah Kerr, which was almost entirely shot to music. We rehearsed it, then recorded the music, and scene by scene, we shot the film to the music. It was opera in the way that the music, the images, the voices, the acting all blended into a splendid whole. It worked. It worked. I could hardly believe my eyes. Filmmaking was never the same for me again after that.
In the mid to late 70s, there was a great rediscovery of these films, which had fallen a bit out of fashion. For like decades, people were only watching Black Narcissus in black and white. And then suddenly, when you bought your color TV, and there it was in this luminous, lurid, rich color. And that popped out. And it was the generation of filmmakers that were just getting going then. I think they were looking around for things to play with, things to be informed by. It seems odd that something like Mean Streets or One from the Heart could come out of Colonel Blimp, but they do. You watch them back to back and you see, the American filmmakers have gone through these movies with their little notebooks saying, this camera move, that cut, that edit. And so even that plot device, so these things recur over and over again.
The Red Shoes was based on a fairy tale by Hans Andersen. The girl longs to dance in the red shoes, but once she puts them on, she can't stop dancing until she dies.
I wanted to make a real theater fantasy, always drenched with the theater, not nowhere, but on a stage, only a stage that took in the whole world. This is the actual little sequence that Massine choreographed himself. It was pretty raw, like a fairy tale should be. And in 42 seconds, he packed so much emotion and movement.
Now, this is the tension between the man she's going to marry, wants to marry, does marry.
Marry scoring, yeah.
And the Diaghilev figure.
Anton Walbrook. They always call him the Diaghilev character, but it was just as much Corder or me. There are lots of impresarios like that. Yeah. I wouldn't be surprised if you're one.
Not in the slightest. I'm a gentle, approachable chap who tries to interview impresarios like yourself.
Oh, so was he, but he just tore people apart as well.
Were you trying to say things about artists and art and film as an art and that sort of thing, which you do mention again in your writing? And what were you trying to say there?
Just the sky is the limit, that art is something worth dying for.
And here in this sequence, that's exactly what she does. She decides to put on the shoes.
And the shoes run away with her down the steps. And when we come to the balustrade where she's supposed to jump over, that was her dive possess. Wonderful, isn't it?
And this got you in a lot of trouble with the critics.
Yes,
the fact
I'm
that her
afraid.
smashed-up body shown at the end of the film. You got a
Not
very hostile
only
reception.
did Michael Powell not give us a happy ending, not only did he kill the ballerina, but he shows us in gory detail how she was killed. I said, but it is a happy ending. She died for her art. Well, after all, you know, if a girl throws herself from a height onto a railway line and the train runs over her, you would expect a certain amount of blood. But it really upset them, the sudden realism of it, which was so moving.
Why do you think it was so important for you to show somebody dying for their art? One way it's a fine idea, and another way it's a morbid idea. Why were you so attracted to demonstrating it through this fairy tale?
I don't think it's morbid. I think because I would do it myself.
Really?
Hmm. Stop believing.